time to grow with the SEO Queen. Receive the perfect leads like never before. No traffic is gonna explode. It's time to grow.
Welcome to the SEO Queen Tech Show, a podcast to help you get more credibility, visibility, and profitability through inspiration, technology, and marketing insight. This podcast is for professionals and entrepreneurs who are looking to get more customers, clients, and patients on Bashani Radio, iHeartRadio, and iTunes. Bashani Radio, always talking about everything from New York City. You can listen to the SEO Queen Tech Show on any mobile phone or tablet device. Also, as a thank you gift for listening to the SEO Queen Tech Show, you can go to SEOqueen.com and download the free ebook, 101 Ways to Improve Your Marketing and Sales. So today we have a very special guest. We have the creative, the writer, the founder and director of the brand new Children of Africa Preschool and Cultural Center based in Los Angeles, California. Her name is Senayt Gaim. How are you today?
Hey, how are you? I'm so happy to be on your show.
Well, I'm happy to have you, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Did I say it correctly?
Senayt.
Senayt, and the last name?
Gaim.
Gaim. I've been so afraid to mispronounce it, so
It's okay.
Gaim. I'm gonna get it down. You know, my name is Zealand Rentis, and so I have a little practice with rare names, So I wanted to ask you, what made you, what has drawn you to African culture, and specifically what country are you, have you visited? And I mean, yes, take us on your African journey, because I know you've done some world traveling, so.
Yes. Well, I want to, talk a little bit about how I got introduced to you and then work back from there. I started a woman's online magazine that I don't do anymore, but that's how, I was introduced to you, and, you do amazing work. So I'm so excited to work with you again. But that was inspired by my travels. And it was a magazine in which women around the world got to tell their stories from their perspectives. And if we want to go further than that, I've always been super attracted to other cultures, other people, since I was a little child. And so my degree, well, let me go even further. I come from an African family. My family is Eritrean. I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I live in LA, but I've lived in so many different places. And growing up with a family that's an immigrant, even though I was born and raised here, I got that international influence. We didn't travel anywhere, but it was just different when you would go hang out with your friends and, the things that you did at home versus, what other families did. But I think that's most people and their diverse experience in America, right? And so as I got older, I went to college here at Cal State LA, and I took a class. I don't remember what class it was, but it was something about Black history. And I remember thinking, they never taught us any of this in school, we learned about Harriet Tubman, barely Malcolm X. Probably I've, watched a movie on him or something. But you weren't really taught Black history and any type of Black empowerment, besides Harriet Tubman and Martin Luther King. And so when I took this class, I was like, wow, this is eye-opening. Everybody needs to know this, And so I took more classes, and I ended up majoring in Pan-African history and politics. And then when I was in college, I decided to go to, the Black neighborhoods in LA, like Watts and Compton and stuff, and South Central, and start teaching Black history. I would volunteer my time to teach Black history classes in schools. And so it kind of expanded from that. And then when I graduated from my university degree, the economy was really bad. I don't know if you remember, like back in 2007, 2008, there was no jobs. There was like nothing. And so I took that opportunity to go and pack up and move to Africa. I didn't know anyone there, but I was like, I'm not going to sit here and waste my time and, live in my parents' house. And so I got offered a job to teach at a college in Sudan. And this was like at the height of, everyone was telling me not to do it because, they're like, oh, Africa has wars and this and that. And I think at the time it was like, you were hearing things about Darfur and, all that kind of stuff. And so I was like, no, I'm going to do it because this is, why not? What else do I have going on? And it's, and I want to experience it for myself. I don't, when you have a university degree, yes, you are learning about Black history, but you got to keep in mind that history is biased and it's still being told from a white perspective. You know what I'm saying? They are like, a lot of them are white.
Absolutely. I understand what you're saying. Absolutely.
That are teaching Black history. They're like, majority of them are white people talking about the Black experience, right? And so I was like, I need to see this for myself. And when I went to Africa, it was such a crazy experience because it was like I had the educational background as far as like understanding like Black psychology and race relations and history and politics and all of that. But when you go there and see it for yourself, it's just like a whole nother level of like education, because when you're reading it in a book, that's like, you're just kind of repeating what someone else is teaching you. But when you're there in person, you have emotional education and you're having those experiences. And it was just such a mind-blowing experience. Like I said, I didn't know anyone there. I was offered a job. Now that I think about it, I'm like, well, how do I know I wasn't going to get scammed? Like someone just offering you a job. You don't really know nobody like that, but I just trusted the process and was like, I'm going to do it and see what happens out of that. And it was the best experience ever. Like, I was like on a high for like months, just happy to be there, happy to get the experience. And through that, I ended up traveling to Ethiopia, South Africa, Kenya, Uganda. I went to so many places.
Oh, wow. That is a lot of places.
Yeah. And it, as many, and this is the thing also, it's like people have such a, I've been to the Caribbean and I've been to like Asia, a lot of Asian countries and Europe too. But people like to box Africa into this like big box of like, oh, Africa. And they just assume like it's all the same thing. But literally every country that I went to in Africa was like a whole opposite experience. So like when you're in Egypt, it's like everyone looks very Mariah Carey-ish. It's very Muslim, it's very ancient Egypt is not, which, the Egypt that we're taught is not the realistic modern Egypt that's existing today. You know what I mean? Or like when you go to, Ethiopia, like how everyone tends to have like and it's desert in, mostly desert in Egypt. Then you go to Ethiopia, which is like 2 hours away and it's like all lush and green and it's, and it's the people, the culture, the language, everything's different, the foods. Then you go to South Africa and then South Africa's like, it's very similar to the States, it's like everybody's a different race. Everyone's a different color. The foods are different. It's very like white people have been living in South Africa, just as long as white people have been living in America. So it's like a mirror of American culture, but just more like Afrocentric European culture. So like every experience is so different. And I think that as many countries as I went to in Africa, I still felt like I was only getting a little bit of an experience of what the full Africa was like.
Oh, wow. So you've been to Uganda, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Senegal.
I've been to Eritrea. I've never been to Eritrea. I've been to Sudan, Egypt, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, Rwanda, South Africa, Tanzania.
Oh, wow. So tell me about Ethiopia and Egypt. What were those experiences like?
You know, every African country you go to is a whole like different situation. So what I loved about Ethiopia was Ethiopia is a place that you would go to for history. You wouldn't necessarily go to like Kenya for history. Kenya's like super modern and Europeanish but Afrocentric at the same time, and they have safaris and stuff like that, right? So each place is very different. You wouldn't go to Ethiopia for a safari. Like, you just wouldn't do that. But what you would go to Ethiopia for is the untouched culture. So you got to remember that Ethiopia was never
Colonized.
And so when you look
What
over
was that like, going to a place that was never colonized? Wow.
It's like ancient, like it had you as a history like major, like I actually see the pros and cons of it. I know that sounds wild and crazy, but you got to understand with being colonized comes modernization, right? So like, yes, America had slavery, right? But through slavery, it became the richest nation in the world. Do you get what I'm saying? And so there's like pros and cons to everything. Well, obviously that wasn't a pro for Black people, but as a country is what I'm explaining. And so with Ethiopia, you're going to places that are so ancient. You know, there's some parts of Ethiopia that have never heard of white people. You know what I mean? When you like go deep into the forest in the south, they don't have TV. They've never heard of white people. They've never seen white people, you know? And so
wow.
There's like, you can go to some places like that. And then you can go to some places up north where like they have these like churches that were like built, you know, from rocks, and they're like the most ancient churches in the world. And they're like deep in some like cliffs. So you gotta like, there's no stairs. There's like, you literally have to climb the mountain.
You have to hike.
You have to hike to get to the top. And like, I don't know how the people do it, because you could easily like die. And like, you know, there's no bridges, there's no nothing. So you have to do all that. And those are thousands of years old, you know? And just a lot of things like that, where it's like, it's just so raw and untouched, you know? And, but with that, you experience like a lack of proper roads, you know? With that, you experience poverty, but not in a poverty like hoods, not like that. More like lack of access to like things like water and food. You know what I mean?
Oh, wow. So people are literally living off the land.
Yeah, exactly.
Living off the land, and they are off the grid because there's no grid.
Exactly. But I mean, like they have the capital city, obviously, where, you know, that's different. But when you go outside of the capital city, that's where you see where you could literally just get lost in like time. You know what I mean? Like there was the lady that actually saw my video. I have a video up for the preschool, the Afrocentric preschool I have up, and she contacted me, and she was a doctor doing a PhD on African history and culture. And she was explaining to me, she was an anthropologist, and she's like, I got to meet you and let's have lunch. And I said, okay, this was last week. And she was telling me that she was living in the south of Ethiopia, where she had to walk for 7 hours to the nearest village. And she was living with the village people there. And I was like, well, what was that like? She was like, she did it, I think it was like for 2 years. And she learned the local language, because they don't speak the major language that they have in Ethiopia down there. Like, and I was like, do they think that they're a part of the major like country? They're like, they don't even connect with that at all. Like they live in their own world. They're not even farmers. They're like bushmen, Like they literally connect to the land and get up. They're like completely associated with everything else that's not of the land.
Wow.
You
So they
know?
basically they hunt and gather.
Exactly.
Wow.
They hunt and gather, and that's how they live. And so this was last week, and she was explaining that whole process to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, how do they deal with the government officials? You know, like the people, they're like, they don't like them because they just, when they see the people from like what they consider, so there's different tribes, right? So,
Right.
but they're called Amhara. Amhara are the ones that live in the capital. So she's like, when they see the Amharas from the capital come there, they think, oh, what do these people want from me? They don't have that association of like like they're coming to get you know, like taxing and this and that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, they just think of these people will come and try to take my land.
Right.
That's the association they have with that. So it's really interesting to hear things from her perspective, because I didn't go down there and I didn't have that connection in particular. I was in the capital and, you know, I got to see the villages and stuff, but I didn't go deep into the places where she was at. And so she was explaining, you know, these things to me, that people still exist and still live like that in these areas. And so that's what I think is amazing about Ethiopia, is like that, yes, they still struggle with, you know, like having electricity in certain places and infrastructure and you know, like they're still struggling with the basic things because they weren't colonized. But at the same time, it's amazing to just go there and just see what it was like hundreds of years ago, you know, and to have that actual experience. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a question for you. Was there any like biblical history that you ran across? Because I know Moses married an Ethiopian woman. Did you run across anything like that when you were in your travels?
That's what I was going to say when it came to like Egypt, like the historical parts of like what we're kind of taught about Africa are not realistic to what is now. Right. So like even when I went to Egypt, and Cairo is like a bustling city. It's like New York on crack. Right. So it's just tons of traffic, people. When you're in traffic, like people come up to you selling you things. You could drink coffee in traffic because people will just come and sell it to you. You know what I'm saying? They'll bring you meals.
Wait, you could be at a stop sign and order coffee and a meal?
Yeah. And they'll come and like sell it to you. Like that's how much bustling energy there is in that city, like clubs to late at night. You know what I'm saying? But like when I went to Mount Sinai, you know, in Egypt, you know, like where the way that Moses went, that, you know, that road by the water, not by the water, but Mount Sinai where the 10 Commandments were. Right. And when I went there, it was so peaceful. And some of the people that were in that area were still living like that. So they didn't have electricity. They didn't have none of those things. They lived in tents. And, you know, but that is like a particular area where they were living like that. So it's hard to explain. It's like having like someone like live in LA, but the rest of California is village like. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying. That's incredible.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of Africa is like that, where it's like, as modernized as Cairo is, and they have so many millions of people living in that city. If you go outside of it and you keep driving, you know, you'll get historical components. So maybe you'll get a taste of like the old Egypt, but it's like, it's not really like that anymore. And it's like the same thing with Ethiopia to a certain extent. If you're in the capital, you know, you're going to get people who know Beyonce and will try to dress like her, and, you know, and like they're really infatuated with American culture, you know, but you have to go like really far out and outside of the city to really get that type of historical component. But like the people who live like in the city and the people who live further out are not the same. They're like almost extreme opposites.
Wow. So there's cultural differences with the city and the country folk and just the country overall. So how did these travels impact you? So you went on those trips, you started the blog to give women all over the world a voice, and now your next venture is this preschool and cultural center. So how have your experiences and past success, informed your newest venture so far?
When I went to travel and, did little business ventures abroad, and it was really more of like exploring who I am and what I was, here to do. Like I would say up until like my 30s, until I was like 29, I wasn't so focused on what everyone else was focused on. Like everyone else is like, oh, you got to get your stuff together. You got to, get a job and focus and make that money. And, it's important to do these things. Like I was more focused on, which everyone thought was weird at the moment in time. But I was like, I'm focused on trying to understand who I am and my purpose in this world. Right. So when I did the magazine, it was like I was trying to have people kind of relate to my experience, because it's hard for people to understand my stories and my experiences when you're living in LA struggling to pay your bills. You know what I mean? It's just not relatable. And so
Right,
I was
right.
like, people have to hear these stories, the people that I'm coming across and the people that I meet and how it's impacted me and how it's changed my life. And so the magazine was made for a way to network with people around the world in a way.
Right.
So you hear a story about, a perspective of a girl from Brazil and her struggles being a woman, and then you'd hear a story about, like maybe a girl in India who, but it's all from their own voices. So I'm helping them edit it and like, I'm helping them prepare their own stories, because I don't want you to hear it from my perspective. I want you to hear it from
Right.
their perspective.
Exactly.
Right. And so what I was doing was I was editing the stories and just people that I had met, people, not just who I've met, but just people that I've networked with, and just like what their life was like in India, what their life was like in Cairo, what their life was like in, Sudan or whatever. And so each one was telling their perspective of what their day-to-day life was, whether it was concerning religion, politics, health, or whatever. It was their story, right? And that's kind of like what happened, and that's how I met you. And it was doing well. I felt like it was doing really well at the time. It wasn't like social media wasn't a huge thing, as big as it is now, and people were liking it. It was called Mind, Body, and Politics, and it did well. And so after the magazine was, I couldn't afford to keep it anymore, and that's a whole nother story. But I decided that when I came back, that I wanted to somehow take everything that I've learned and apply it to the people somehow. But I didn't really know exactly how I was going to do that. And so all I knew was that I wanted to empower Black people, which I think that's always been my, my purpose since.
That's a great purpose. I love it.
I always wanted to empower Black people. I understood the problems that we had as a people, not just in America, not just in LA, not just, locally, but like, traveling to the Caribbean and Africa and, Europe and everywhere. I saw a common denominator in what hurt us as a people, and I felt like there was things that I felt like I kind of knew would help. And so I was like, I'm going to start young, and I'm going to start with the youth. So that's when I decided to open up a preschool catered to Black youth. And I'm hoping that it's going to I'm going to have like more than one center, so I can just like start like a revolution almost, where, you know, we can empower Black kids in the same way that, you know, the Jewish communities do. The Jewish communities are strong with their traditions and cultures, and they've been able to build themselves up generationally. And I was like, why can't we do that as Black people?
Right. And that's definitely something that is needed. I know if your center was around when my son was 2 to 5 years old, I definitely would have put him in that environment, because it's so important for, you know, our kids to have a strong sense of self, and develop that self-esteem and self-worth. So what are the other benefits that you see of your preschool and cultural center for the young people and families that choose to come?
Well, what I want to do in the preschools, and actually it's going to be an after-school program as well, but what I want to do is empower Black youth to be confident within themselves and self-love, and to learn more about Black history, Black culture, and to you know, have an association with Africa. I think that's really important, because slavery took that away, and slavery took away the self-esteem of Black people by having to follow the rules of white culture. You know what I mean? We don't have blonde hair and blue eyes. So why is our standard of beauty compared to that? You know, we don't have certain things that white society or culture tries to tell us that we should be like. We're not that, you know?
Right.
And so we shouldn't have to compare ourselves to that. And I think that's the one thing that we as Black people have been hurt with, is having our history and self-esteem taken away from us, and then having to be brainwashed by whiteness, you know?
Right. I agree.
And it's just different, because even when I lived in Africa, I felt so confident in my skin. There was just things I didn't have to worry about, like I did in the States. You know, there was other things. I mean, every place has pros and cons, right? So you're going to deal with things like poverty. You're going to deal with things like, you know, just jealousy in a different way than here. You know what I'm saying? Because you know, you have people or whatever. But the things that I didn't have to worry about was I had a sense of community. I felt very safe anywhere that I went in Africa. I felt very safe, very accepted. I felt like I could walk around and nothing would happen to me, because there's just like a level of community. You know, someone's going to be like, hey, sister, you good? You know, anywhere that I went in Africa, because they want me to feel protected, you know. That is different than here. I feel like here we're a little bit more individualized. Everyone kind of just cares about themselves and what they need to be doing for themselves. Where in Africa, everyone thinks in a collective. So, you know, everyone wants, like, if you had a funeral, for example, or someone in your family died, everyone that knows you would come to your house and make sure you're good. You know what I'm saying? As far as like food, you know, how you feeling today? Just drop by, make sure you're not lonely. Just there's a strong sense of community that I think has been taken away from us here. That and I think it has a lot to do through slavery, you know, and the broken homes. And so one of the things that I want to establish in the preschool is a strong sense of community. I want these kids to be friends with everyone. I want them to know each other's families. I want them to feel, you know, even if, you know, there's something wrong or something bad happening in your own family, that you feel supported by me and, you know, your aunties and uncles, you know, through the other families that you are surrounded with. And, you know, I think that's really important. And I think that's something that is a little bit lacked in the Black community right now.
Right. So we're getting close to the end of our time together, but I wanted to know, like, how can people connect with you online and learn more about your preschool? And can you describe a day in the life of your preschool students?
Okay. A day in the life of my preschool students would be like them walking in the morning, and then we have like a schedule. We want to celebrate African holidays. And so like, we don't discriminate against, like, we're not like religious centered. Okay. So we're not like super Christian or super Muslim or whatever, but we would like everyone to know about each other's religions. You know what I mean? So if it's like Christmas or Kwanzaa or, Muslim Ramadan or, whatever, we would celebrate, we would be inclusive to everyone, just so that they know, like, oh, today's a special day and this is what we're learning today. So we would want to incorporate regular preschool education with the senses, right? Because that's how children at that age learn. They use their five senses. And so, it would be things like foods and music and, physical activity, like maybe dance and, and art, and just things that will help them remember and stay connected to these things that would be related to African culture,
Beautiful.
And I also have an African teacher that I'm trying to, as long as the parents are down with that, it would be a little bit extra for charge because I'd have to hire her, but like an extra $100 a month, but we would incorporate an African teacher to come and teach the language. So if the parents wanted to learn Amharic, which is an Ethiopian language, or Swahili or Arabic or, whatever, we could incorporate that into the lessons as well. So the teacher would come in about an hour a day, and it was just be purely that language for like an hour, like every day, Monday through Friday. And so I try to make it really affordable, compared to the other schools nearby. But my goal isn't to make money, because someone asked me like, oh, can you do this online? And you would make a lot of money that way. And I'm like, I don't really want to do online classes because I want it to be like a quality school. Like, I want them to have these experiences and to remember them, not have to be online and, and try to connect that way. So I'm trying to do it where it's like these kids will grow up and have these experiences and be leaders in their communities, and and they touch other people. So I really want it to be something very positive for the kids. You know what I mean?
Yes, that sounds amazing. That sounds amazing. Well, thank you so much for stopping by. Please share with everyone how they can connect with you and your preschool and cultural center one more time, please.
Sure. You can find me on Children of Africa on Instagram. And you could also, I'm sure you're going to write this down somewhere, right? So, and then childrenofafrica.site. And we are located on Slauson and Arlington, right next to the old Marcus Garvey School, which was a huge inspiration for me as well. Because I remember being in college and going and like dropping by and looking at the school and talking to the teachers there and the students. And so, it's really for the Black community. Like I said, I try to make it as affordable as I could because we're trying to reach the youth and we're trying to make it a community center, So, yeah.
Really,
My phone number, 760-412-2554. Once again, 760-412-2554.
Well, thank you so much. You have been listening to the SEO Queen Tech Show with my special guest,
Senayt Gaim.
Senayt Gaim. And I'm so happy you were here. And she is the founder and director of the Children of Africa Preschool and Cultural Center. I highly recommend you go to childrenofafrica.site and check out her preschool and cultural center today. If you're not in the LA area, make sure you spread the word to your friends and family who are. The rates are very affordable, and you definitely get an Afrocentric experience, which is so important for our children because, believe it or not, when your kids get in school, and I've experienced this with my own son, they see the difference in race right away. I mean, to the point where my son, he actually created an avatar as part of his class during the pandemic. And when I looked at the avatar was white. And I asked him, why is it your avatar brown like you? And so we had this whole conversation, and what it really made me understand is no matter how much we as parents try to emphasize a healthy view of self, is important for that view to be reinforced in the schools. And so this is a great opportunity for you as a parent to get your child into an Afrocentric environment where your child can learn to love and value themselves in the midst of all this white supremacy running around in society. And our kids are precious, they really are. So thank you so much for coming on to the show. And do you have any other final comments?
It's crazy that you're mentioning that about your son, because I had the exact same experience when I was growing up. Like, I was the only Black kid in my elementary school, and I didn't know that I was until my teacher pointed it out to me. And then I looked around and I was like, I guess I am the only Black kid. But it's children. As children, you don't really see that. You feel like you're different, but you don't really know how. You know what I mean?
Right,
and then standards of beauty, and you feeling isolated, and all these other things. And that's why I think it's so important to have a Black teacher.
Right.
A Black teacher teach you about yourself and be empowered in that. And it's not always a Black or white thing, but I'm going to tell you this. People talk about apartheid being a positive thing. I mean, not apartheid, I'm sorry. When we were in the South, when everything was separated, right?
Oh, segregation.
Yeah, how everything was separated. That was probably the best time in African American history, because we had the richest businesses. You know what I mean? And I think that's something that people should look out for. I'm not saying that diversity is a bad thing, but you're being told by white people where and how you should move, versus when you're doing it yourself, there's a level of empowerment in that.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a whole nother discussion, but Black empowerment is so important, especially for the children.
So important. And as children that age, you have a strong sense of self that you need. I would say up until the age of 7, I've read this in so many books with child development books and spiritualities and stuff like that. Like, that's really when you are fully emotionally developed and have a sense of self, right? So that first 7 years is really important for that child. Right? After the age of 7, your sense of self is already kind of developed emotionally. Right? So that's why it's so important to show a child love and self-love and, all those things, because it influences them for the rest of their lives, and how they see the world, how they see themselves, and how they see who they are in the world. You know what I mean? And so it's really important to have that Black consciousness put in them at that age.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much again for coming on. And for everybody listening, thank you for listening to the SEO Queen Tech Show. We are live on Bashani Radio, talking about everything from New York City. Please check out the podcast and the website at SEOqueen.com. And also swing by the site to download your ebook, 101 Ways to Improve Your Marketing and Sales. My guest today is the founder and director of the Children of Africa Preschool and Cultural Center, Senayt Gaim. Thank you so much for coming, and until next time.
It's time to grow with the SEO Queen. With visibility.